Let's talk conspiracy theories. Yeah, let's get right into it. Let's talk about Bill Gates and microchips and vaccines and the World Health Organization and this secret endeavor to try and steal away your freedoms. Let's talk about 5G mind control and shadowy cabals of people meeting in secret to have sexual cult-like orgies with Mr. Epstein. Let's talk about China and their facial recognition system and AI takeover of our very means of going about our daily lives. And let's talk about these things because they're everywhere. They're in every little bit of media. They're on every Facebook page. And let's get down to the root of these things and see what we have to see about them. But before we do, let's look at a little island in the Caribbean. An island that is really only half an island, a nation on an island that is split in half, and that half of that island is called Haiti. Now in 2004, I was sent to Haiti as a platoon commander, leading 30 troops in a stability operation that was designed to bring peace and security to a failed nation. We had gone down there as part of a NATO emergency stability operation that was being led by the United States, and we were there in Canada, as was France. And then it was taken over by the United Nations and subsequently failed. Well, why were we there? And that's an interesting question. I know why we were there, because terrible things were happening every day in that country. I started down in a little place called Port-au-Prince, which is the capital of Haiti and a sizable city. And when we were in Port-au-Prince, you saw terrible, dismaying lack of any regard for human life every day. And even for the basic, fundamental personal comforts that ought to be afforded yourself. When you walk down the street in Haiti, the stench was incredible. There was decaying meat and flesh everywhere. There was no garbage removal. People literally dumped their garbage and human waste into the street directly in front of the front door of their house, everywhere that you went. The expectation was that eventually the rain would come and wash it down into the bay. And to a degree that was true as the rainy season came. But then down in the basin, you had garbage of such magnitude that the highway itself was unusable. Under 6 to 12 feet of garbage everywhere. There's a town inside of Port-au-Prince called Cité Soleil, which is a terrible, poverty-stricken slum that is built atop a peninsula of some 60 acres of garbage that wasn't there in '64. And this is just the garbage that is washed off the hillside, all of the plastic and such, and people have built their houses on top of this dump. And the children walk through from house to house, wading through human waste and vile, rotting carcasses as they simply navigate their way to and from their home. This is a place where, when the investigator came to see what was the appropriate compensation for hardship, our CIMIC team, which takes care of the support to local charity, etc., took them along with them on their daily routine. And as they went to visit the morgue, they were visiting the morgue because the cooling unit had failed. And you go into this place, and the stench of rotting bodies, of course, was tremendous. And there was a river of decaying human waste pouring out of the front door of the morgue. And as they went in, the morgue was overflowing with dead children and infants. And why? Why was this happening? How could a nation have come to this place? You see, the statistic that we were told was that 40% of children died before the age of 2 because there was no medical care. And there wasn't. When you went there, you found that all of the hospitals, except for the very rich, had no materials, no drugs, no bandages, rarely even a cot to die on. People that we took in with gunshot wounds that you really could have just wrapped up and they should have lived, we'd find dead the next day. The place was a travesty. And perhaps the most telling anecdote of all would be the day that my company commander was driving down the highway with his crazy driver, and they witnessed a man try to run across the highway, and he got hit by 2 stake trucks and ripped in half right in front of them. And so they stopped the car, the Jeep, and my company commander got out and called for a body recovery. And as he was standing there, people came running out into the street, risking their own lives, trying to pull off the clothing of this corpse that had been ripped in half. This human being who was now lying still, pumping blood, and people were trying to steal the clothing off of his body. And my company commander was enraged, pulled out his pistol, and started screaming, get back, or I'll shoot you, every one of you." Because people had descended into animalistic behavior. It was a travesty, a human tragedy of epic proportions. And how did it happen? Well, if we're going to talk conspiracy theories, what conspiracy led to the destruction of this nation of people so that there was absolute anarchy and violence in all places? Well, there was a conspiracy, if you want to call it that, a conspiracy of the West, a collective conscious decision in which these people's ancestors were treated as subhuman beings and brought over to be slaves to work plantations in Haiti. And if you want to understand the mentality of the time in which this took place, it's helpful perhaps to tell you another horrible story, the story of El Negro. Now, bear with me. This is the title. It's a Spanish museum exhibit, which only recently was returned to its native country for proper handling, let's say. El Negro was a Tswana man whose body had been taken by a man named Jules Verreau, a French dealer in naturalia, in 1831, taxidermied, and put in a museum in France, and then subsequently was moved about until it ended up in a town in Spain. When this exhibit of a human being that had been taxidermied and put into a pose as a warrior was put up, the local paper praised the bravery of Mr. Verreau for managing to retrieve this fascinating specimen from people more wild than they are black, and praised it as a much more exciting animal exhibit than the giraffes and ostriches even. And that tells you everything you need to know right now. It's a horrible story, but it's a story of not only one man's vile behavior like a serial killer who does things that people don't know about, it tells you a story about the acceptance of that behavior as laudable, not even something to be frowned upon. Because collectively, people considered that if you were black, you were sub-evolved and a subhuman person. Now, you might want to look at the colonial and slave trade that goes even farther back than obviously the 1800s, and you might want to note that there was evil in the church's colonialism, and yeah, I mean, true, right? But there's a big difference here when you have to step back and realize that when the early colonists went and subjugated places in Africa, North America, and India and the Far East, they went with a mentality that these cultures were inferior, and they went with the mentality of trying to bring their culture and change these people for the better. Understand that at least they thought them humans worthy to worship their God. Now, it wasn't always pretty. It was often quite evil. But it was still a far cry from what came when people were treated as animals, and cunning animals that were at least able to work the field, if nothing else, and to be murdered with no concern or stain upon your conscience and used as you saw fit, because they were not even truly human beings. Now that is a conspiracy of epic proportions. How were the majority of Caucasian Europeans convinced that they were a superior race and that all other humans were subhuman, animal-like beings? Who did this? Who was it that oversaw this shadowy conspiracy to change the minds of people and alter their thinking so that they would even keep the missionaries away lest they convince people that they had worth? The East India Trading Company did that. They wanted nothing of the church in India because the church might come in and convince these people that they were actually their equals, and that was to be stopped because then they couldn't be exploited as completely, right? How did that change happen? Who led it? Who was overseeing this tyrannical, awful conspiracy? Because if you want to look at it, it was that treatment, that subhuman treatment, that led to the Haitian revolt, and it was the trauma and the brokenness from that led to the subsequent counter revolts and the revolt after that and the revolt after that, and the constant rebellions and fighting and the instability that has marked Haiti for all of its life. How is it that they have continued not to ever get out of that cycle of violence and hatred and total disdain for human life? What is going on there? Is it that the Americans are still part of some shadowy organization that's trying to destroy the lives of Haitians? What's causing this? What's leading to it? Now, I'm not going to answer that question right now. I'm going to let you mull on that. But let's talk about Bill Gates. Let's talk about microchips. Let's talk about the World Health Organization and all that NOS. What is going on with this stuff? What is the effort that is at work here to try to undermine your freedoms? What is this stuff that people would try and change the world so that there's always more regulation and more power at the top and so on and so forth? Well, I think that it bears mentioning that if you want to talk about Bill Gates and microchips, that Bill Gates did say that he wants to have digital vaccines certificates for people. He did not actually ever say he wanted to microchip people. That leap of logic was made by someone else who noticed that he had a patent for some kind of subdermal dye technology, and of course, with great alarm, that its patent is 060606. Well, it isn't actually. I mean, those numbers do exist in the much larger alphanumeric that is the patent number, but probably a bit of a leap there to jump straight to Bill Gates as the Antichrist. But I'm not saying that means that there's nothing to be afraid of here. The idea of being able to track where you are at all times and the government wanting to track you at all times so that they can control you is something you probably should be a little bit afraid of. Whether it's through cell phone tracking or, some chip that they implant in you. The reality is that governments do seek to have this information. They want to know everything about you, and they want to know everywhere that you've gone. They have reasons for that, and they generally probably think they're good reasons, because it makes you safer, because it helps us to prevent criminal activity and terrorism and so on and so forth. China uses facial recognition and artificial intelligence to track where people are at all times in metropolitan areas. And you can look up some terrifying real information on that real conspiracy to utterly control the lives of millions of people. And in particular, they're using it for things like making sure that if you are participating in Christian activities that you're penalized for it, or if you are part of a Muslim minority that you are penalized for it, and you can't just integrate or sneak into society with your dangerous ideas, right? And we should be alarmed at that stuff. There's even, you can look this up, experiments that they're doing in China with schoolrooms where they're having kids put on these headbands, very creepy, and it monitors your brain wavelengths, or not brain wavelengths, but brain activity, basically, just very generically, so that they can track whether or not kids are paying attention. And when the brain activity goes into creative or, disrupts from attentive patterns or whatever, they can monitor that, and then they can be disciplined for whenever they weren't paying attention to their teachers. That's terrifying stuff, because people are going to have their hands on that technology, right? But, these things exist. And you might ask yourself what we're supposed to do about that. The other one that I mentioned is that whole Epstein thing. Was there a conspiracy around Epstein? Yeah, I mean, of course there was. I don't know what the conspiracy was, and neither do you as far as that goes. There were important people hanging around a person who was doing sex trafficking and had an island retreat where apparently there were sex parties being held. Yeah, I dare say that there was some kind of conspiracy, even if it was only a conspiracy to engage in carnal evil where people wouldn't see it. And perhaps, and quite likely, it would seem, to engage in illegal and unacceptable by anyone's standards practices, such as pedophilia and the like. And was he killed for that? Yeah, probably. It's unlikely that his camera just accidentally failed and then he strangled himself with something he probably didn't have. But anyways, yes, there's shadowy stuff at work. Yes, there are evil people. Yes, there are folks who are trying to do bad things. And all of this bears looking at, sure. Except the 5G one. Sorry, that's just stupid. 5G might turn out to cause cancer, I suppose. It's definitely not a mind control device. That's not how that works, guys. That's not how non-lethal weapons work. And if you've been watching videos that suggest that this is the case, If David Ecke's in him, then understand that he also thinks we're being ruled by reptilian overlords from another planet. So maybe check your sources a little bit. But apart from the 5G one and the contrails and flat Earth, there are many, many conspiracies in this world, for sure. Absolutely. But I think we misunderstand what they are a lot of the time. What is the conspiracy of Bill Gates? Well, if there is a conspiracy of Bill Gates, and, that's reasonable to assert there might be, he's a very, very rich and powerful man, and no doubt he is working to achieve ends that he wants to achieve. And is the World Health Organization, which he is a huge contributor to, an avenue through which he can influence the nations of the world? Seems reasonable. But understand, he's probably actually in his own mind trying to work out good, what he thinks is good. And yeah, there's going to be greed in that. There's going to be a desire for personal power in that. But most likely he thinks, this is me saving the world. I am going to, because of my brilliance, do things which will ultimately help people. And understand that the communist Chinese government actually is probably thinking much the same kind of thing, that although they desire power and they desire control over other people's lives, they desire order, and they think this is the highest good, that people all act orderly and don't disrupt their good society, which is working, because, chaos, well, that's where Haiti is, if you will. We don't want to go down the road of chaos, so we will control people and we will execute those who are dissidents, and we will bulldoze the churches because we don't want people thinking that God cares about them and that they're important, because they might then actually start asserting themselves, etc., which is their mindset. I think it's probably quite misguided as to what would actually happen there, but, this stuff should alarm you, but here's the really dark secret. Here's the really dark secret, is that this is not them trying to control you, because there isn't really a them. This is people being people. This is what happens when people express themselves without constraint. Who made the Haitians be evil to one another? There is a long list of people who did horrible things to them, but who made them do it? They did. Who inspired that person to go and callously rip boots off of a dead person? He did. Now, his circumstances were most likely terrible, and his poverty extreme, but if I could give you an example of the insanity of that, it would be, there was a quarry on the hillside that it was supposedly a weapons cache, and I went to do a raid on it by helicopter and tried to cut it off and see what was going on. Nothing was there, but in the course of that investigation, I had to ask why all these men are standing at the cliffside, smashing away at it, undercutting the cliffside with pickaxes, which seemed exceedingly dangerous, and explained a lot about why 20 to 40 people seemed to be killed there every week. It was always on the radio. Well, this was happening while there were 12 giant excavators sitting there, stripped down to the bare frame. Well, the thing is that World Vision and other non-governmental organizations had donated those excavators, and there'd been like one donated every year when people realized the tragedy of this work environment, because what was happening is these people are going in and because unemployment's like 80%, they'll take any job in their desperation, and they'll undercut the cliff face until the thing falls down, right? It's like 100 feet high, and then whoever's under it when it happens, they just die. So it's like Russian roulette for food. And so then these NGOs would say, well, we need to do something about this, and they give them an excavator. And then what would happen immediately is that people would steal everything off of it and rip the guts right out of it and sell it for like sheet metal and engine parts in the market. Why did that happen? Why could people not look towards the bigger good of the future, the collective good of their people? Because they had no desire beyond today, because they expressed themselves in their full humanity. And this is the fundamental problem, is that what happens to let governments decide that the best thing for you is that they control you utterly is that they have decided that they are God. They have placed themselves in the place of God. The Constitution of the United States is a remarkable document that stands apart from many other constitutions in that it recognized the danger of human nature very, very plainly. And the institution was designed in order to allow people to protect themselves against tyranny. And that's what the Second Amendment was for. People often don't understand that, is that the United States Constitution was designed to let people rise up and overthrow their own government, because the Founding Fathers expected that human nature being what it would eventually lead to tyranny. Not that that could ever happen. Our Constitution here in Canada comes from the Magna Carta tradition, and that was a recognition as well of human nature. It was the constraining power on the Crown, which recognized that people will inevitably abuse power, and so there need to be checks and balances to that power. People reject this when they reject that they are fallible and that they are good. Rather, that they are bad, fundamentally, and able to do bad things and not able to do good things. So at the end of the day, the problem with Haiti was that people were evil, and they treated other people as according to what was best for themselves. So French Europeans, along with English and Spanish and German Europeans, colonized other countries, and Italians in Ethiopia, eventually. They colonized other countries and ruled over other people as though they were not of equal value. And they did that because they did not believe fundamentally that they were of equal value. And the reason that Haiti has never come out of the disastrous start that it had is because their cultural understanding of values did not ever enshrine anything like a collective good or a higher authority which required you to be good to other people. And if you want to know what's going on with all of these conspiracies to steal away your freedom and to subjugate you, and let's be real here, a lot of this conspiracy theory stuff is ridiculous, but there's a conspiracy that's been going on since people walk the earth, in which people will always, if you look at history, try to subjugate others for their own power and pleasure. And they will do, eventually, whatever it takes to deceive, convince, and connive their way into a power where they can then rule by strength. That's how people work. And the only thing that stands against that is an ideology that demands you treat others with the same respect that you demand for yourself. That demands that you actually appease a higher authority in order to stand free from judgment. We have a moral code in our Western history which dictated that it was between you and God how you dealt with other people. When you cast God out of that, there was no higher authority than men. When you cast God away, you end up with rationalism and whatever humans can discover for themselves. Well, guess what? Darwin came up with an idea of evolution, and people followed that train to where they thought it logically went, and that logically went to the place that those people aren't human, and I am very human, and I therefore have the right to use them for whatever suits my purpose. It was a great little tool in their toolbox. It was scientific rejection of God that actually enabled the true descent into the deepest, darkest treatment of Africans, of black-skinned humans, of brown-skinned humans, right? Really. It was the rejection of their humanity, or the rejection that humanity had any inherent value. And it is rejection that you as a person have inherent value that leads to communist things like controlling your every move and action and sanctioning you, not letting you buy, tracking your movements, and then even putting you in prison or killing you if you speak words that they don't approve of, because it is not you that has value, it is only the state that has value. So when we reject an ideology which enshrines the value of human life, we reject our own safety, and ultimately we will fall into this great conspiracy. And that conspiracy is not a human one. It is a spiritual conspiracy. It is an ancient spiritual conspiracy, which is the conspiracy that works against God and the right place of God in the lives of men. So, yes, there is a conspiracy, and that conspiracy is that Satan is always at work in his subtle ploys and his subtle ways. We are inherently greedy, monstrous, selfish beings. And when we deny the truth and the reality of that, and we lose our humility and seek to reign as gods in our own lives, we invariably will fall into expressing those things. It happens every single time. Become a student of history and recognize that fact. The only way back is to recognize the centrality and the huge importance of this idea that people all have value. It was funny, Nietzsche, he hated Christianity. He hated it actually in large part because it taught people to respect all men as equal and did not respect his Übermensch, right? He wanted the elevation, he wanted to grow out of it, but this slave morality of Christendom respected all men as equal, and that constrained people, and it made them weak in his view. Well, he was quite right to understand, as he did, that Christianity was the only system of ideology to ever allow for true equality. Now, of course, it's been perverted many times, countless times. You could list perversions and fill hundreds and hundreds of pages of examples of where supposed Christianity has violated that first principle. But the first principle of Christianity is love your neighbor as yourself. And why do you do it? Because you love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. It is truly the only way the world has ever seen to liberty and peace and love of your fellow man. And that is the conspiracy, is that when that is cut away from you, we will absolutely, even while you are being convinced that it is Christ and Christianity that is evil, you will slip into the snare of the world's ideology of slavery, that you don't have the smarts to rule yourself and must be ruled over and controlled for the sake of me and the greater good. Challenge yourself. Challenge yourself as to which conspiracies are really the ones that are seeking to destroy you. Cheers.